I'm Claudia Besser. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Education, and it's my great pleasure to introduce today's panel discussion on our latest exhibition/project, It Is What It Is, Conversations About Iraq. We're going to hear about the creation and implementation of this important new work by British artist Jeremy Deller. The artist has invited a diverse group of individuals who all have firsthand experience of Iraq, including Iraq war veterans, journalists, scholars, and Iraqi nationals, many of whom are here today, and I want to thank you all so much for coming. They're going to take up residence here at the Hammer Museum with the express purpose of promoting open dialogue about Iraq with the public. The project as a whole is called It Is What It Is, Conversations About Iraq. It's part of the 3M project, which is a collaboration of 3 museums to commission, organize, and co-present new works of art. The 3 museums are the Hammer Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York. And this project is also presented in collaboration with Creative Time. Our moderator today is Laura Hoptman. She's the Krauss Family Senior Curator at the New Museum in New York and co-curator of this exhibition. Our other panelists are Amy Mackie, also of the New Museum and co-curator of the project. Project artist Jeremy Deller, who creates a broad range of works, including orchestrated events, films, and publications that draw attention to different forms of culture and issues just outside the peripheral vision of the mainstream. We also have former U.S. soldier Jonathan Harvey, who spent a year-long tour in Iraq in 2007. And we have Esam Pasha, who's a writer and painter from Iraq. And finally, we have here today Nato Thompson, who's Chief Curator at Creative Time in New York City and also a co-curator of this project. After today's panel, I want to invite you all to please come and join us in the courtyard, where we're going to have some tea, and you'll be able to speak with the panelists and our Iraqi experts who were able to come today and continue the dialogue outside. So I hope you can join us. And now please join me in welcoming Laura Hoptman and our panelists. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much, UCLA Hammer Museum, for hosting this panel. I want to particularly thank Elizabeth Klein, Curatorial Assistant, Jessica Howe, the Director of Exhibitions, Sue York, who organized all of the interns, which I'll speak about in a moment, and Jordan El Grabli, the Director of the Levantine Center, who located all of the experts for the Jeremy Deller Project here in Los Angeles. And I'm Laura Hoptman, the Krauss Family Senior Curator, and to my left is Nato Thompson, the Chief Curator at Creative Time and the organizer of the road trip for this project. Next to Nato is Jonathan Harvey from Alaska and a veteran of the Iraq War. Next to Jonathan's left is Jeremy Deller, the artist of this project, from this project, and about this project. To the left of Jeremy is Esam Pasha. Esam is also an artist. He was a journalist and a translator during the Iraq War, and comes from New London, Connecticut. And finally, all the way at the end, is the co-curator of this exhibition from the New Museum, my colleague Amy Mackie. This is an exhibition and a project that was enormous and involved an unbelievable 17 institutions in its incarnation. It started, it's very true, it started as a result of the 3 Museum Project, which is a series of commissions undertaken by 3 museums, the New Museum in New York, the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. By every 2 years, the 3 museums get together and commission 3 artists to do 3 new projects. Jeremy Deller was a commissionee as of 2 years ago. This project took 2 years to develop, and when Jeremy did so, it became It Is What It Is, Conversations About Iraq, that started at the New Museum of Contemporary Art with a series of discussions, informal discussions with 35 experts who were asked to come to the museum and speak to the general public, speak with the general public about the present conflict in Iraq. The second portion of this project took form when the new museum partnered with Creative Time, a public art organization, a national public art organization, and Nato Thompson became co-curator, so that was our third co-curator. Nato will tell you more. But during their 3.5-week sojourn across the country, two experts, Jonathan and Esam, Jeremy the artist, and Nato, with two other crew people, and Nato will explain it, partnered with 13 organizations to continue that conversation. And here we are today in Los Angeles with our friends and co-producers from the Hammer Museum. Finally, this exhibition will appear at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago in October 2009. It will be the final site for the exhibition. Very happy to be here, and very quickly I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague Amy, who will give a quick overview of what happened at the new museum.
Laura touched on this briefly, but at the new museum we invited 35 guest experts over the course of 6 weeks. They included soldiers, Iraqi citizens, diplomats, journalists, who came for 3-hour sessions to engage with the public. Some people had more formal presentations. They brought slides, they brought videos they wanted to show, maybe materials they had accumulated during their time in Iraq. But basically they were there to just to talk, to be available to ask, to have questions asked of them, and to, I guess, give museum goers something that they couldn't necessarily find other places.
I'll show an image of it in action.
Okay,
Maybe that
great.
will help. There we go.
So it was a casual, it was a very informal environment, but a comfortable place where people could hang out. And what often happened was that people weren't sure if they wanted to go sit down or engage, so maybe sometimes there was a lot of listening that also happened. I'm not going to say too much more. I want to let us keep going, but there were other objects in the room. The car, that we brought a car over that was destroyed in an explosion on Al-Mutanabi Street on March 5th in 2007. The car was very much secondary in the exhibition. It was not, as Jeremy specified, it was not a sculpture. It was really something to inspire conversation, or to, it was almost the white elephant in the room.
And actually, we got the car from an 18th institution. It was an individual, independent curator from Holland who managed to get the car from Iraq. And this car has had a very interesting history, being exhibited as a kind of aide de memoire, or an object that is a kind of conversation piece about Iraq. So there were 18 institutions, 17 institutions in the U.S. and 1 in Holland. Jeremy, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, I suppose what we're going to talk about, us four here, we've just, yesterday we finished our trip through the US within this RV, towing the car. And I suppose we're just going to talk about a few of the experiences, and then we'll probably open it up to questions. I think Laura might ask us a few questions. Nato might want to chip in. We'll show a few images, and then we might show some of the footage that we shot on the way. So basically, the idea really was to make this exhibition in New York mobile, and for it to travel the US and give people the opportunity to see an exhibition in the public realm, effectively, instead of having to go to a museum in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, which is where it ends up. They can actually see it in their hometown or on the freeway even, because the car was towed by this RV, and at all times it was in public. It was on show, and there was a text on it saying exactly what the car was. There's a very bland text, really, just a descriptive text saying this car was blown up in an explosion in Baghdad on 5th of March 2007, I think. So that was part of the work, definitely, to show it to the public, even if they weren't expecting to see it, or even if they didn't want to see it, to be honest. So on the freeways, it was seen by thousands of people every day. And then we turned up in towns, mostly pre-arranged. So this is in Santa Fe. And we basically went out onto the streets. We had a flyer, and we would give out the flyer to people. And it's kind of nerve-wracking to begin with. When you've got a flyer in your hand, you're approaching someone. It could be a cop, could be a homeless person, could be anyone. You don't really know who they are, what their feelings are, if they served in the army, whatever. You give them the flyer, and you say, this is what we're doing today. That's what I used to say. Or this is some information about the car. And sometimes people didn't people read it. Sometimes they walked away. But on the whole, most people just stood around, read it, and then came and talked to us. This guy's taking a photograph. So it was that initially was quite a nerve-wracking thing. But by the end of the project, I'd go up to anyone, and Nato and I would go up to anyone. But more dangerous looking, the better. And we would just like give them a flyer and just say, well, come and have a look. Because what we found out, it actually gave me quite a lot of faith in the American public, that people were interested in it, and they didn't want to have an argument about it necessarily. They wanted to maybe put their case across. But we presented this very strictly. Well, we hoped to present it as neutral as possible. I know that's an impossible thing to do, but we didn't want to make it a big anti-war piece, or certainly not a pro-war piece even. People can bring their own thoughts to this object, certainly. And the object was a way of drawing people into conversations with Esam and with Harvey. But we didn't want to market it in any way, because we knew that would close down people and shut them down, really, and they wouldn't want to become part of a conversation that they knew we had this certain point to put across. We weren't putting across a point. So I'll just show you a few more images.
I was just going to say, Jeremy,
Yeah.
another thing, when we first started the project, we were very worried it'd go down the easy rider kind of fate, right, where the guy gets blown off the motorcycle with the motorcycle. We thought we'd get a lot more antagonism, but in fact, the neutral tone of this was extraordinarily effective in so much as I think we had 3 encounters with police, and they all loved the project.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons. So I was actually personally very nervous before we started the project. I really thought we're just going to be fighting our way through America effectively, or arguing at least our way through America. But that didn't happen, and I was very happy about that, because there's been enough confrontation about this on the media, and so I just felt that it was time for some other form of dialogue or communication. And the reason I did this project, I should probably say that before I say anything else, really, was that it's a personal obsession, this whole conflict in Iraq, and I just felt that as an artist, I'm very lucky. I'm in a position where I can do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do, and as an artist who has a certain status within the art world, I'm going to be pretty honest about it. I can get to do things that most artists don't get to do. So I approached it from a very personal level. I just thought, what would I want to do? I would love to go into a bar or be on the street and meet someone from Iraq, or meet someone who's served in the army and has been to Iraq. That's what I would love to do if I was walking down the street and had no idea what was around the corner, or see a car that had been destroyed there, because all my experience of that country has been two-dimensional. So when you have a person there who's had a real life experiences in that country, then you have an object there, this huge object which you can't ignore. It's a huge, ugly thing. You'll see it outside. I just thought, well, that's what I would like to see. And so I started from a very personal point of view. I'll just talk a few about these images. We've only got about 5 or 6. This is in New Orleans. These young people are a Christian group who are going around the mission area giving out power bars to the homeless. And actually, Esam is a very, very calm person, but this is the one time he almost lost his temper because of what these young people were saying. They're from Orange County. And so their views were like 4 years old, effectively. They were spouting their parents' views. And so it was a strange encounter to see them there anyway in New Orleans, this Christian group. They had Jesus rocks kind of written on their arms and so on. And this boy in the middle, this young, it's difficult to tell how old he is. He was saying some strange things. But so it was very random. We didn't know who you were going to bump into at the beginning of the day, and that made it exciting, and it made it slightly stressful. I don't know how, we'll ask these guys maybe in a minute how stressful it was. It was certainly stressful for me just to to be in that position. But it's great to be exposed in an environment where you basically lose control of the environment as soon as you arrive, because you're at the mercy of the weather, and you're at the mercy of people. Have you seen that? So, for example, this is a typical scene. This, you might not think much is happening there, but there's actually quite a lot happening. This is the police. We had to call the police because this homeless guy started shouting sort of racist views.
The racist homeless guy.
Yeah, in Cincinnati. This lady turned up showing paintings.
I can't see where you're pointing.
Oh, sorry. I'm just pointing at a screen there. The lady with the pram, you can see her. She turned up with paintings she claimed her child had made, with the child on the left.
It's about 8 of them.
Yeah. Esam's having a chat with a kind of peace activist.
Yes.
And anyway, so...
What was his name? Remember that?
It's
It was like
Peace,
Child or something?
Peace Walker.
Peace
A
Walker.
Peace Walker, yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, this was a kind of typical scene in a way.
Skywalker.
You might not have thought much was going on at any one time, but you look around, there's all these things happening and shifting and
Also,
so
the
on.
old guy that was standing behind me has a project about the Olympic Committee in Iraq, and he was coming there to talk to us about it.
So this was a very, very public space in Cincinnati. Some places we were in were college campuses, so you get a certain kind of person, or you thought you would. But here we were in the center of downtown in Cincinnati, and we just got everything, everyone that went by, we flyered and chatted to, more or less. That's a college campus,
That's in Houston.
yeah.
Yeah. The picture is stretched.
Again, this is Cincinnati. That's Houston. Do you want to say anything about this situation? This is a Vietnam vet who came and talked to us. We got a lot of vets came. We might show you some footage of some vets. And they stayed for longer than anyone else, really, just talking about their experiences and how it related to the current experiences and so on. And that's me in Dallas, trying to give flyers to joggers on a... I did give one... There we go. You can see the lady in the middle is reading it. She's running, and no, I'm not touching him. I promise. She's running and reading, and that was on the campus where George Bush's library is going to be. Unfortunately, we were there on Easter.
Yeah, that was Easter Saturday on SMU, so there wasn't a whole lot of people there.
But there were enough people. We just ran after people, basically, and cyclists we ran after and so on. But we have this video component. I just thought we might show a couple of the videos, and then we'll do some kind of Q&A kind of thing. I'm not quite sure how to get onto the video bit.
Here, I'll show you.
Okay.
Just get out of here, and we'll go. Whap. And then, where's the video? It's down in the. Is this it?
Yeah.
So in sum, after 6 weeks of civil discourse about the issue on Iraq in the new museum, then there were 3.5 more weeks of this extraordinary conversation, again, without any exception, right? Civil discourse for 3.5 weeks across the country with all different kinds of Americans.
Yeah, exactly. This is in Santa Fe. I'm going to make it big. Sorry?
Nato, can you tell us where you stopped? Can you run off in your head where we stopped?
Sure. Well, we started drove out of a trailer park in New Jersey. And then we went to Washington, D.C., Richmond, Virginia, Philadelphia, over to Cincinnati, St. Louis, Kansas City, Memphis, Nashville, a commune in Tennessee called The Farm, down into New Orleans, over to Houston, Dallas, Amarillo, Texas, where we almost didn't survive, and then Santa Fe, over to Tempe, Arizona, to Coachella, and then to Joshua Tree, and then we arrived here. And I think what's also just something we think about, something that totally blew our minds, is that for a country that's extraordinarily bellicose, its citizenship is extremely congenial. And people had very complicated feelings, but at the same time, there was a magic about activating civic space that we could really feel. And it was a very adrenaline-driven project because there's a lot of emotions that happened a lot. And I think you're going to see this in this video at some point.
I'm going to try and play it.
I do have one question for you guys.
Oh.
Did you run into very many people who were not Americans? Because that's something we did have at the new museum. We had more of an international audience. Did you run into very many foreigners on the road?
We ran to two guys, one from Chad and the other from the Senegal, and we ran to some Iraqis.
Yeah, I
And-
mean, there were a small number, smattering here and there. Certainly, the bigger the city, the more you get
Yeah.
of the international crowd. College campuses, especially, we saw a lot
Iranian,
of foreign
Saudi,
students.
Turkish.
Right, let's see if this works.
Do you want to act it out?
Maybe not.
Oh, it's not loading?
It's loaded, but it's not playing. Okay, well, you could paraphrase him if you wanted.
Which one's this, Red Fox?
Yeah. Do you want to paraphrase him later?
Well, America's a land of comfortable contradiction, and well, Red Fox is interesting because he served in Vietnam, and I don't know if you imagine what a Native American's position, he's a Sioux Indian, what his position on the war would be. I would have assumed against, but he was very into the war, and he kind of summarized basically saying that, now this is my country, and you defend your country no matter what. And he was extraordinarily patriotic. And also told this kind of incredible story about being in a team of Sioux Indians in Vietnam, and had to serve as scouts, where they would go out at night and actually look for enemy by having to wear sunglasses all day so their eyes were ready to go out at night.
He was also saying that that they, when they weren't speaking, they looked enough like the adversary in Vietnam that they could get away with sort of wandering around in civilian clothes and, only coming out at night at the same time that the people they were going after were out, things like that. And, a lot of the point that he was making is, we grew up with the skills that we used over there, so it was very easy for us.
What was the most surprising question that you got on the road, whilst on the road?
A little kid from a church group in Arkansas that they had actually come to Memphis. We were at the Lorraine Motel, the site of where Martin Luther King was shot, and it was on the anniversary of his assassination. And a little kid asked me if we had an infinite gun that never ran out of bullets. But one of the things that made it interesting was he spoke with such a thick accent that none of our group could understand him. His mother couldn't even understand him. But somehow I was able to pick out the words infinite and gun. And so I was able to figure out what he was asking.
Esam, what about you?
Well, same bunch of kids that Harvey's talking about. One of them asked me if there is slavery in Iraq. And I thought that nobody ever has thought about that to ask, so I thought it's a great question.
We're going to show a different piece of footage because we couldn't get that guy up, unfortunately. This is someone we bumped into in Arizona at the university, and we'll just play it. It's kind of pretty straightforward.
With Kellogg, Brown and Root, which is a subsidiary of Halliburton, and I was in the Morale, Welfare, and Recreation Programming Department. There were kind of the regular things of planning basketball tournaments and arm wrestling tournaments and events like that. And a lot of what I ended up doing was really off-the-radar, informal kinds of things. I think one of the most exciting and unusual activities that we started to run was a regular Pictionary and manicure night, and this is for U.S. military personnel, men. And they got really excited about Mary Kay manicures and would come on a nightly basis and stand in line to have their their hands softened. So there were really unusual things like that.
Does that mean they were very bored?
They were incredibly bored. They were bored out of their minds. They were in the best shape of their lives because they worked out all the time and really sat around waiting to be given things to do. And also, I think the most shocking thing for me was experiencing the futility of a lot of the missions that they were sent out to do, patrolling just to give them something to do, which was insane.
And what was morale like? How did it change, and how did you deal with that?
Being one of the few females, especially civilian females, I certainly found myself in the position of just confidant and counselor a great deal, and that ranged a lot from listening to stories of wives back home who ran off with my brother and things like that, to really dealing with the trauma of someone watching that day someone that they love be violently killed.
So a lot of these films are just, they're just basically 2 minutes from
Get
often.
the Memphis guy.
I'll try and get the Memphis guy up. Okay.
I have a question for Esam while you're looking for the Memphis guy. Esam, did you have a lot of Iraqis coming up to you and asking you, the most basic questions like, where are you from? Do you know so-and-so? And trying to make some sort of connection back in Iraq?
Not really. We met a few Iraqis. One of them we met in D.C., and he was an Iraqi activist, and he was very upset for the fact that we are not against the war, and he was saying that we are not clear in our stand, and we had to talk to him, Harvey and I, for 45 minutes before he walks out a happy man. And other Iraqis, I start to ask them because I want to make conversation with them. So, you're Iraqi, where are you from? And they would answer me. So nobody was interested where I came from.
So they saw you as this representative of the project more than an individual who had come from Iraq?
Somewhat, yeah. And the other couple of Iraqis that I met, they left Iraq way before I did. So some questions they had about how Iraq was like after they left. Same thing when I see somebody, like when I met Harvey, I started to ask him what Iraq like in 2008. So.
And there was that Iranian woman you met in Houston that's got the video of her, and she was asking about headscarves in Iraq, correct? Esam?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I thought you were talking to Jeremy. You want, or you want him to put the thing. Yes, she was asking about headscarves and what if women shouldn't. How do you say? Let people control her and make her wear headscarf and stuff like that. So I told her the same that I told an American journalist who asked me the same thing. And I was in Iraq and I was wearing a scarf to cover my hair so I wouldn't look eccentric and exposed to danger. And I told her, listen, lady, it's a war zone. I'm a man and I'm wearing a headscarf to protect myself. If that's gonna maintain the life of women, they better do whatever that maintain their lives. It's not a fashion or making a statement or whatever. It's a war zone.
Did you feel, since you're the only Iraqi, we were the only Iraqi on the trip, did you feel a sort of, any sort of special onus to, I don't know, represent for the Iraqi people or something? I wondered that as you all went off.
Yes, at some points I felt like I need to correct some stuff or defend Iraqis that were not here when people are assuming instead of asking stuff that's not true about Iraq, and when somebody did say some misconception about Iraqis. And I think it was in Cincinnati when somebody talks about Iraqis being anti-Americans. So I felt that I needed to defend that, and I said, they say Iraqis are anti-Americans because they burnt the American flag. Well, you guys has burnt the Iraqi flag and the pool that the flag on and the building that the pool was on and the people that in it. So
He also made sure that we all understood that our alphabet came from the Sumerians.
that was in a different conference that I was. Somebody asked me about the history of Iraq and how it's continuously going hand in hand. So I kind of tried to sum 9,000 years in like 2 minutes.
I'm going to try and play this, even though this message isn't that optimistic. But this is New Orleans. Let's see if it works. Sorry, it's very dark for some reason. Just listen to it. They knew they were in the presence of cocktails.
Yes.
What is it like to be in Iraq?
It's like to be at home, only it's hot in summer, very cold in winter, and with lots of bombs and airplanes and tanks on the streets. It's like being in a video game. Only you can actually hear them and smell the smoke. Yes?
How did they start the war?
How the war started? I don't know. I have no idea how the war started. Only overnight we heard on the radio that there's going to be a war on us, and so it happened.
Who was fighting?
Well, if I know who's fighting, I would tell you, but I don't know. It's militias, people that have money from other countries, and they are sent to fight in Iraq.
Do you ever go to sleep?
No, we don't.
Don't y'all be tired?
We are tired. Well, yeah, we are tired, but tell the militias that fight there and the army if they are tired. And I'll bet they are tired, but those who are doing the war are not actually fighting it, so they're not tired.
Y'all got travel. Have an American home?
I have home in here, yeah.
Have you went to another state or something?
Yes. I went to other states and they are all looks very, very
Have
nice.
you been in Europe?
No, never been in Europe.
Oh my God, that's bad.
Well, you know, I have to say it was kids who asked the best questions at the new museum also.
They definitely
There was
did.
one kid one day who asked, I can't remember who our expert was that day, but he asked the guy, why did Bush bomb Iraq? And before anyone else, all the adults in the room could say anything, another kid answered him, and he said, oh, well, he thinks there's oil there. So it was really interesting to watch these two 10-year-olds have their own conversation.
Children are not afraid to be unsophisticated, unlike a lot of adults.
Just as some things that came up that were arguments, I mean, actually, Esam and Harvey, when we set this up, we didn't know if they'd get along or not, but now I think they get along too well. But some of the few things that came up were some discussions about insurgents, whether or not the term insurgents is productive. How did I'm just wondering about you two. How did the relationship from a soldier in Iraqi kind of change over time?
Well, it didn't change really. It just grows stronger because we spend more time together and we have almost the same background and same age. I should emphasize we are the same age.
Yeah, I mean, each of us served in the army of our own country. Each of us served in Iraq working with coalition forces. So, we have a lot of similar vocabulary, even though we came at it from two different places. So, I mean, right from our very first time meeting each other was we got flown into New York for the opening at the new museum, and they put us up in an apartment there, as you know, and just, I was like, hey, what's up? How's it going? And we just got along right away.
Maybe we should take questions from the audience, or we could show one last piece of footage and then take questions, maybe?
Yes, no, absolutely, because part of this this public program is not only an overview of the project so far, but also a continuation of the project. So by turning, this is sort of meta, but I'll say it anyway, by turning it over to you, the audience, we continue the conversation, and we will, and as it will be continued here at the Hammer, beginning on Tuesday when the show opens. The only difference is that we have a microphone, and one of the things that Jeremy stipulated and has stipulated is that there's no recording of these conversations, and they're usually not mic'd, right?
Yeah, it's just too complicated. I mean, it's just sort of, as soon as you start recording people, you have to sign waivers, and then it just sort of gets in the way of any conversation, I suspect, especially in a closed museum. I mean, when we were recording people on the street, it was slightly different, but it always sort of changes people, often how they approach a conversation. That's why we ended up doing pieces to camera, just like one person talking to camera, because at least they knew exactly what was going on in being filmed.
Can I just ask one more question before it's of Nato, my colleague. Nato, you're a curator now focused specifically on public art, and I just wanted to know how you, now that you've been through the tour part of this project and it's going to go back into a museum, how you see it as whether it is or is not a part of the public art discourse now.
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, I think of museums as extremely civic spaces. That's at least the nonprofit mission statement. And America very much needs that. People are hungry for it. I mean, that's the thing that we kind of notice.
For what conversation?
Hungry for dialogue, publicness, civicness. I think that's one of the, people talk about what are the politics of this project. Well, one of the underlying politics is civic space and a kind of deep need for people to get off the internet and have a kind of temporality and a spatial relationship with each other and difference. We really felt people excited about that, and I think in terms of more and more with this kind of work as a project, I keep feeling like I keep thinking we're more like This American Life than we are contemporary art, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean to say the stories are so rich, and the narratives and the form of it was very powerful in terms of thinking about how this can work. Like, I won't go too long, but when Jeremy was just pointing about that one image where there's 6 different people and it looked almost boring, right? When you got on this project, you realize there's so much power in people talking that their stories are so amazing and so interesting and complex. And we just don't get that. A lot of people say, oh, the media, it's the media's fault. But the onus is on us to get our own information. I think people are very excited to get that from each other.
There was no lack of, I mean, my biggest worry was that no one was going to talk to you guys. And that didn't turn out to be the case at all, right?
No. Maybe it is now if no one asks questions. Any questions?
And are there mics?
I'm going to try and show the film behind us. Shall I try and do it now?
Yeah.
Think of a question, if it works. We haven't had
two.
that
I
much.
see two.
I know we've got 2, but I'm just worried that it's not going to work again. Or this one. I'm just going to hit this button. Okay. Can you make it a bit louder as well? Just a touch. Thanks.
Anytime the country goes through hard times, the Great Depression, World War II, or anything else, it's the culture that brings people together. It's all about history. Stax Music, Isaac Hayes, Otis Redding, Booker T and the MGs, Sun Records, all of it. It all started here. You know, all of it started here. You know, Memphis gets a bad rap, you know, but people in Memphis work harder to get along because of the adversity that they've been through. And that if people in other places could see how hard people in Memphis work to get along and to right the wrongs of the past, it wouldn't have such a bad reputation. I love Memphis. Memphis is a great place. And when I moved down here last year, I decided that's the last time I'm moving. I'm never going back to Nashville. I'm staying right here in Memphis. And, you know, this is it, because I'm old now. I'm getting close to retirement.
Did you feel isolated when you were, because of your political views early on?
God, yes. My daughter that I told y'all about, that chewed the cop out, at the time that happened, she was ill. And a few months later, she died.
I'm sorry.
And the same lady that called the cops on her, I was standing outside the day before the funeral, and we were planning some funeral arrangements. And this lady had the nerve to walk up to me and tell me that the reason that my daughter died was that God was punishing us for not supporting George W. Bush. And I mean, that did something to me. I mean, it just kind of turned me against any type of religion. And, you know, as far as be bipartisan and forgive and forget, no. You can't forgive and forget. Like that car over there that got blown all to pieces, you know, the people live over there. How many of their loved ones died in that blast? Should they forgive and forget? You know, they didn't come over here and start a war on us. We came over there and started a war on them. Why shouldn't they hate us forever? If someone did that to, you know, to my neighborhood, I guarantee you I'd hate them forever. But Americans have a sense of entitlement, and everything's owed to us. Why? You know, why should we have everything?
That, I think, is my favorite bit of footage. There's too, I mean, from a filmmaking perspective, there's too many edits. It would be nice if that had been said in one go, but what I love about that piece, if that's the right word, is the fact that he goes from music, from race relations, to his daughter, the kind of personal story he has, and then he goes on to the wider picture, and that all happened within about 8 minutes. So that really is is as good as, for me, is as good as it got in terms of just talking to someone about something, because of how he related everything together, basically, and connected all these things to what we were trying to do. So anyway, we had some questions. Lady at the front.
If you could wait for the microphone.
Can you wait for a mic? Please.
I was wondering, Jeremy, what it was specifically about the Iraq conflict that touched you, as opposed to focusing on one of the many other conflicts around the world, Sudan, Congo, any other? And secondly, do you plan to exhibit in Europe, and do you anticipate that the response would be a bit more different on the streets of Europe?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. The car, the destroyed car, was originally shortlisted to be a public sculpture in London in Trafalgar Square. So that, in a way, that was the genesis of the project, or in some respects, the genesis of the project. But it wasn't selected in the end, not surprisingly, really. So that was the idea for the car. I don't think there'd be much point taking this around the UK or around Europe, because it would immediately be seen as an anti-war piece and just confirm everyone's fears about these horrible Americans and so on and all this. And so I just didn't want to do that. The first question was about why Iraq. I've lived in the US for about 2.5 years in the last 7 years, so I feel I've been part of it with you here, in a sense. I was here all of 2001, 2002, and then 2003 a lot, and then on and off. So I've kind of felt it in that way. And also because of the UK's involvement, we're totally implicit. We're part of it too. So I think that's why. It's not, I've given you the answer backwards, but basically that's why this conflict especially.
I'm sorry, my question is a fairly prosaic one, but it's just hard for me to imagine how Harvey got involved in all of this. So I just wonder how you found Harvey and how he joined your group.
How both of them joined.
Well, Esam, yes, of course, but I can see as an artist how the connection might have been made, or at least I can imagine. But with Harvey, it's hard to imagine. So
can I just
I'd love to know about both.
Can I just say, the fact that Esam's an artist actually was not of any interest to me. I'm sorry to say that, because what I was interested in Esam was his personal history, but also his kind of breadth of knowledge about Iraqi culture and life. And the art thing, that's fine, but it's not important for me personally. But Harvey, maybe you should say how you got involved.
Somebody saw it, a listing from Creative Time on idealist.org, and knowing that they were looking for someone with recent Iraq experience and that I was unemployed, forwarded it to me. And so I applied for it. I got an email back. They were very excited to talk to me. Could I do a phone interview? So I did a phone interview with Nato and some other Creative Time staff, as well as with Jeremy. And I don't know how long the phone interview was, but it was long enough that they decided that I was their man to spend 3 weeks in an RV with.
And he came up with the title of the project as well. He kept talking, using that phrase, "It is what it is." And so maybe that was the clincher. But
I think, Lynn, are you talking about its connection to art?
Well, actually, I wasn't. I was just curious about how, and I would like to know about how whether you knew about through the art world was really what I was asking, not whether it was
all right, no, I didn't. No.
But we did actually get him referred to us by Steve Mumford, a painter. I mean, a guy that was embedded in the troops. But to be quite frank, we posted like a job, and we didn't even talk about it as an art project, and we just said, you're going to go across the country, talk about your experiences, because we figured that makes more sense.
And from my perspective, I mean, getting paid to drive cross country talking to people, I mean, who wouldn't apply for that?
The problem with using the word art as well is that people think that if you keep going on, oh, it's an art project, art, this and that, they think there might be there might be a catch, and B, the car they might think is actually a hoax. It's a fake.
It wasn't the art thing that interested me, it was the way that the methodology of going about it, finding people who are going to do this in a really objective way.
Yeah. You just get the measure of people. The question was, how do we choose the individuals? You just get the measure of someone quickly, and you just hope you've made the right decision. We interviewed a lot of people in person, Iraqis, and Esam seemed to be a person we could spend a lot of time with, and who had a quite broad view of the culture and of the history, as well as a personal experience. So, we didn't know. It's a 20-minute interview. You don't know what someone's going to be like if you spend 3.5 weeks with them at close quarters, but it's instinct.
Well, and it should also say that Harvey did psychological operations over there, and one of the key things he said on the phone interview was, half my job is getting troops to not pull the trigger first. And we thought, well, sounds like you're the right guy to be on the road with us.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that they had this fear of a lot of opposition, and they hired two pretty big guys.
But Lynn, actually, I want to just clarify this because it was a very different way of finding people. At the New Museum, we did rely on personal recommendations. So, of course, people came from the art world because we're a museum and we know people in the art world. That was a different process. We ended up with a database of nearly 300 people. Our team compiled that, and then we sort of cast a very wide net and basically asked everyone if they were interested. And in the end, it was kind of self-selecting. The people who were really interested, who felt comfortable talking about their experiences in a public situation, they're the people who we ended up with in the end. It was very different for the Creative Time portion because they did post, it was like a job listing. So there was sort of two different ways of finding people.
And the fact that it was a job and people being paid, and paid, quite well, to be honest, it meant that we could actually tell them what to do. And they wouldn't say, oh, I don't want to go out and talk to someone, it's raining. Well, actually, no, you are, because
We did a lot of talking in the rain.
Yeah, so it made it a more professional relationship. It wasn't just like a non-profit sort of thing where everyone just sort of stumbles around. I mean, it felt like that at times when I was involved, but on the whole, we tried to be really organized, even though it was very grassroots in a lot of senses.
So, first of all, would Harvey and Esam mind just telling us a little, or being a little bit more specific about where you all were in Iraq and what unit you were with? And then the second part is, it seems like everyone up there actually represents different parts of the world that there are commonly misperceptions about soldiers, artists, Iraqis. I'm curious how the level of discourse was with folks out there. Did you find people were pretty educated about the issues you all were talking about, or was it, I guess, yeah, what was the level of understanding?
Well, I lived my life in Iraq until 2005 when I moved here, and I graduated from university, College of Administration, Baghdad University College of Administration, and I worked as a full-time artist, painter that is, and journalist, freelance journalist, and translator too. So I've been pretty much everywhere in Iraq, and I researched in the Iraqi history. Being an artist during the embargo that blocked me from the heavy influence of the European art and methods and history, like most of Iraqi artists during the 80s. So that's pretty much where I was. I was located in Baghdad, and I spent a year or two in the north and the south and stuff like that.
You work for the Americans too. Yeah.
Before the invasion, I was a full-time painter. And after the invasion, I worked for the 101st Airborne for a month, and then after that, for the next 10 months, I worked for the Florida National Guards. After that, I worked for different media agencies as a translator and then a journalist. And in 2005, I worked for the British Embassy, the police section, so pretty much everywhere inside the green zone. So.
For myself, I was in the Pennsylvania National Guard as a combat engineer. I switched over to a reserve unit outside of DC in psychological operations in Baghdad last year. I was there in northwest Baghdad from January through November. I was the NCOIC, which if you've seen enough movies, is the equivalent of a platoon sergeant for a psychological operations detachment. Basically twice the normal complement of teams because of the surge. Working with a very, very, very active brigade that was conducting a lot of PSYOP and civil affairs missions because of the switch to sort of a counterinsurgency strategy rather than a warfighting strategy.
Yeah, she was asking, how did you find the level of discourse across the country?
I mean, it varied. It depended on who it was. It was, you had everything from, people who came to us saying, I don't really know enough about the war in Iraq to really take a position, to people who had very, very strong opinions based on either a Bushian or Marxist reading of history, and everything in between.
I like that dichotomy.
A lot of different people have misconception about Iraq, and one of them is the Iraqis being anti-Americans. And the other, some older guy came to me in Houston. He was making all those assumptions about Iraq having more oil in the south than the north, and Shiites are richer than Sunnis. And then I was like, where do you read such thing? And he was like, I'm just asking.
This is for Esam. Esam, is that right? I'm right here. One of my best friends is actually from Baghdad, and her family has been incredibly devastated by the war in that her brother was murdered in the safe zone, and her other brother, her brother-in-law, was actually kidnapped for a week because he was a doctor and tortured, brutally tortured. And they just recently, her sister and her brother-in-law and their kids actually came here from Jordan because they had to emigrate from Baghdad to Jordan and then finally got here.
Yeah, long process.
He is so psychologically traumatized, obviously, but there's no support for him. And I have a constant discussion with Kinar, who's my friend, about her, and I talked to her sister Gela about this. And what really amazes me, and I don't know if anybody talked to you about this when you were on the road, is how it's such a big misconception about why we went to war and the Americans' perception of how just the war was. And then you hear stories like that, and nothing was done to protect these people. And they were in areas that were supposedly safe and guarded by the American troops and, at the time, international troops. But I think my question, I guess, is, do you find with people that you've known in both the Iraqi army and family members that are really affected psychologically by what happened and have no outlet for it?
Well, what you say is very right and truthful, and that's the part of the argument I base on to be against the war, because that's what war brings. An invading army can never protect civilians because that's not their jobs, and can never fix anything. And that the invasion create all the situations that you talk about. In Iraq, we still have the mental health hospital in the north of Baghdad, and we have a lot of psychiatrists practicing in their clinics. However, people do not go there to them. People day in Iraq is so busy. They have to take their children and worry about them going to schools. They have to secure the small generator they have or maintain the cable that they pull from big generator in there, and they have to get fuel, which is very, very hard to get. Very ironic in Iraq. So your day would be all waiting, and in line, and then rushing from here to there, and getting fresh water, trying to arrange this and that. Now, you don't want to add to this by paying a psychiatrist and waiting in line there, and then so you would, explain to him how traumatized you are, and he would agree or disagree or tell you that according to Freud, he thinks that. So Iraqis don't think about that. They just suppress it until it appears in their bodies as physical, illness, and they would treat it like anyone else.
I think it's also just important to mention just the amount of veterans that came up to us, and why it became very clear why the neutral tone really helped them so much is it became a safe space for people to tell stories that in public I don't think they normally would. They typically would talk to Harvey about what they've been through, but we went with a homeless vet in, where were we? We were in
Cincinnati.
In Cincinnati. And there's a lot of psychological damage across the country that you really feel, and also families of it to say, the soldiers come back, but they're totally changed.
Yeah, and I remember a lady in Memphis. She was listening to a vet that was talking to us, and he was saying how hard and traumatizing there in Iraq, and she was very sympathetic, and the poor guy, and I was listening to her, and she's right, of course. But then I told her, well, you're talking about him, poor guy, and what he's facing there, and he has the American public behind him, the American president behind him, the coalition, the NATO behind him, and everything that he needs is there, and he has his gun in his hand and his body armor. What about those children, Iraqis there, that didn't choose anything and didn't get big salary or a chance to go to college and chose all that? And she said, well, you're right, they must be traumatized, poor people and whatever. So it wasn't really appropriate for me to say that because, of course, both sides are traumatized and got hurt, but it's just something I wanted to mention and comment.
One of the things I wanted to ask you guys is, even though it's like I'm a 8-year Army National Guard veteran. I served in Iraq in 2005. I came out against the war when I got back in 2006, and I still had to serve with my unit. But one of the things that was really good there was the camaraderie, especially with the folks that I deployed with. I caught a lot of flack from the new soldiers coming in, but that flack didn't last long, being that I had rank over them. That, and I was way more sophisticated than them. But I wanted you guys each that were on the road trip to, I guess, tell a small story about each and every single one of you, so I can understand the camaraderie that you guys built across, with this cross-country trip.
Well, if it's not, yeah. Okay. Well,
it's highly inappropriate.
Well, I think that. Yeah, basically, it was. We never had an argument in 3.5 weeks. All these MTV programs about people living together and just screaming at each other in the face. That just didn't happen because we had a job to do. And we just had to get on and do it, and we got on with each other. I know it sounds vaguely ridiculous, but I don't think there's an angry word really said. And we all had the same task in hand. So in a way, it's like being on we were on a mission, effectively. And it was almost kind of planned in a military way, but also it was more like being in a band. As all this very strange sort of mixture of things. But we were very close to each other, and I think we chose people well. We were lucky with who we had. But I'm trying to think of
And between the official schedule, which was pretty grueling, and the unofficial recreation, which was probably more grueling, 6 men in RV, a lot of competitive drinking. But so there wasn't really time to worry about, he just used my toothpaste, anything like that.
But it was a lot of camaraderie there. I mean, the guys, none of them ever interested in desserts, but every restaurant we go, they always point at the good desserts there because I'm the only one that eats them.
we would know before he even sat down whether they served milkshakes, because we knew he was going to order one.
Yeah.
I mean, we told a lot of your mom jokes, and
Mostly about my mom, because
who
I
I had
actually
to
met
meet,
my mom.
and that was very weird. But we also it was just a lot of banter. And to be quite frank, I think what really helped is the project's very serious. And what we're dealing with is really intense. And it kind of brought us together because it wasn't like we were just pointlessly floating around. I think the intensity of it also made the pleasure more too, the joy and the kind of fun on the trip.
Yeah. Hold it.
Hello?
6.
There's
2 other guys.
6 even. I was just wondering whether you felt that having 6 men out on the road changed the dynamics because they weren't women.
We did
you.
interview
Yeah.
women not for the army recruit, but for the Iraqi recruit. And we tried to get a female road manager, but we couldn't. So we were aware of that, and yes, it absolutely did. I imagine it would. It's difficult to say, but it did. I'm sure it did have an effect.
Well, Amy and Tricia joined you for the last 2 days. No, you had 2 people. Did that change anything? Well, Tricia Von Eck is is she here?
She is.
Yay! Curator for the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, who will be the host of this project in October.
I have a question for the 4 of you on the road trip.
In the center.
Okay.
Thank you.
I believe, Jeremy, you started off with, you said your purpose of this was to have a conversation about this particular event, which I assume has kind of a nebulous purpose to me. But my question, all 4 of you, is there such a thing as a just war? And how would you define it? All wars are traumatic, extremely. No one who goes to war can come back unchanged permanently. Permanently. Whether you're the civilians, whether so-called collateral damage, or whether you actually support troops as well as combat troops. So my question, all 4 of you, is there such a thing as a just war? And what would be some of the characteristics of it?
Unfortunately, I'm limited. These guys told me they're going to hit me if I go too long, because this is the sort of topic that I would go on for hours about. But ultimately, I would be turning it around and asking you what justice is. And you'd have to tell me that before I could answer.
I don't know if we're going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There probably is such a thing, yeah, but I don't think this was one.
Well, I don't think there is only just war, because if it's just war, people are going to just pass by it and don't want to talk about it, or there is no consequences of it. It's not just the war, it's the consequences, it's the history that changes, it's everything that connected to it that make all the difference. Just war, a war is nothing but an operation, a military operation to execute some job there. But this is not the only matter about it. It's how much results and consequences that creates.
That's what he asked. He said, is it worth it? Is war ever worth it? That's what he meant.
Is there ever justice in war?
I should say I'm a foreigner. So, excuse me?
The Iran-Iraq War.
Did you know that you guys fought Iran?
Yeah.
I think he wants to know.
That was not a just war. That was not a just war at all, because it's about 3 or 4 border centers that's small, even smaller than the little town that nobody wanted really, but it's the matter of the grudges between Saddam and Khomeini. So that was not a just war. And I cannot think of a just war that happened in our days, really. It's all political grudges and quarrels, so I don't know.
I take the anarchist line, which is nation states aren't me, so wars are typically fought by poor people for rich people. So I think as long as there's nation states, if you really think about it, They're never in poor people's interests. They're just there to get killed.
I said mine, very short. Right at the front. Do the mic.
I'm a journalist, and as a result get solicited to have various guests on constantly, a range of lists. But as it relates to your trip, I can't believe the volume of anti-Arab and anti-Muslim, overtly racist guests that I'm pitched to please have on my radio show. And I wanted to ask if you came into contact with any of that kind of overt, virulent strain of racism that really seems to have manifested itself as though it's kind of openly okay in some quarters in America to be anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Persian, etc.
We had a few people. I mean, some of them were not, I would call sane people. I mean, with their views. I mean, literally, they were kind of street people who were kind of in another place. But we probably had a lot of misunderstanding, I imagine. But Esam might be better equipped.
Yeah, I talked to that guy in the military uniform, a retired guy, a vet from Vietnam. He's not what he believes in, but he was telling me that how some people think about Muslims being terrorists and whatever. I talked to him for like 3 hours, and he was a little bit coming hard on saying that we have the right to defend ourselves, and what would you do if somebody attacks the towers in Iraq, etc., etc. So I explained to him that Iraq has nothing to do with that whatsoever. So he was talking more about what others would say about Muslims. But there's another guy in Santa Fe that he gets so upset because he was saying that what creates war and kills people are the religious extremists. And I told him religious extremists are the ones that try to take religion to the ultimate or to the extreme. And there's nothing in any religion that I know of that allows people to kill other civilians that's safe in their towns. So anyways, we end up by telling him that, I mean, I told him more about politics and money, and he did not believe that. And he said that makes the American army is a bunch of mercenaries. And what's wrong with that? And I was like, it's nothing wrong, but it is what it is. They are mercenaries. So he was like throwing a fit and throwing the brochure. So there are some.
I don't know if we have any more time for questions. Well, how are we doing? Is it no one? Oh, okay.
This question is for Esam. What was the effect of the war when it happened on the economy of the country and the people? How are they making a living and being able to buy food and sustaining themselves? And I heard that there were a lot of people displaced, living in tents. Who's taking care of them? How is this going on? And what are these people doing there in the millions?
Well, I assume when you said the people that get affected by the war is 2003, because in Iraq, as you know, other than the Iraqi-Iran war, there is the war of 1991, the Desert Storm, and 1998, the Desert Fox, and 2003. And in 2003, they are in a very bad condition in those camps, living in a tent in an airy desert area. They are under the mercy of the little trivial help that the UN and the Red Cross is supplying to them, and also under the living under the mercy of the generosity of the towns and villages around them that have charity on them and give them like they are beggars, and they are the richest nation in this world.
It's interesting, too. There's a lot of internal displacement. That's one of the issues that we had in northwest Baghdad last year, was there are a lot of Shiites that had fled Taji and were living in a neighborhood called Haraya, and a lot of living in the homes of Sunnis who had fled Haraya and moved down to Amariya and Bakaria. And there's some of that ongoing between northern Ghazaliya and southern Ghazaliya. And it's one of those, very, very difficult questions, and that's not even to address the millions that are in Jordan. They're the ones more likely living in tents. These people were all at least living in houses, but they weren't living in each other. It was basically sort of a triangle of people living in each other's houses.
This displacement is a little bit more comfortable for them since they change from house to house and they are living near their relatives or their kind of religious or ethnicity. However, this is a dangerous seed for civil war. So it's slightly comfortable but dangerous on the long run. I cannot explain, but I can just tell you that my experience during the embargo, the first few years of the embargo, I spent few days without eating. So there are.
He's making up for lost time.
I'm doing that every day. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is about the title. It is what it is, because it suggests on one level a kind of acceptance of difficulty. So if you're in a war situation, at some point you have to accept it is what it is, and you do what you have to do. But certainly listening to that fellow from Memphis, he was saying the opposite of that. It isn't what it is. This is a problem. And I see this problem and I want to respond to it. So I wanted to ask you about the title, because it's a very resonant title, but it's also, in some sense, quite open-ended. So I'd like to know where it came. Well, it came from what you said, but I'd like to know what it meant to you to sort of approach people on that basis. It is what it is, and then where it went from there.
Well, you're not the first person to ask that question. In a way, that title refers more than anything else to the car, in that the car is that thing, and with the phrase on it. There's no getting away from it. There's no other interpretation of it. It is this thing that's come from this place, and this has happened to it. In terms of the whole project, I liked in a way, the cryptic nature of it, and the almost resignation, which I know is not necessarily the most positive thing, but I just liked the idea of having to just get to deal with this thing that's happened, and that's what I interpreted that phrase as. We don't have that phrase in the UK. So when Harvey kept saying it on the phone, I just thought, wow, that's an amazing phrase. I've never heard it before. And it's kind of cryptic as well, which I quite liked. And then we used that subtitle, Conversations About Iraq, which actually I quite dislike now in retrospect. It's just it doesn't really do it for me. But I haven't really answered your question. But I mean, maybe Harvey can talk about the derivation of it from his perspective.
I mean, it's not something that we invented in the military, but anyone who served in the military or served with the military in any capacity will tell you it's something that we say all the time. And to some extent, there's some resignation to it. It's also a willingness. People serving in Iraq, in general, are sort of apolitical about the war while they're there, because the politics don't matter. You're there, you're doing your job. For me, my biggest goal was to make sure that my 6 teams all came home safely. I was very fortunate. We had guys in the wrong convoy, nobody in the wrong truck. But in the course of doing what you're doing, sometimes someone gets visited by what we call the good idea fairy. And when the good idea fairy comes sprinkling little fairy dust on people's heads, crazy stuff happens. And it's one of those things where it doesn't really matter whether you like it. You go out and you do it, because there's somebody with shinier buttons than you who's telling you got to go do it. And as a leader, when you're dealing with your soldiers and they're complaining, and you don't want to tell them, guess what? I just was in a big argument for an hour with the brigade commander, and I got, quote unquote, I got my pee-pee slapped fighting this fight. So I agree completely with what they're saying, but you can't really tell them that. You try and give them the sort of the rally of the troops kind of thing. Hey, let's just go out and get it done. We'll get it done. We'll be able to do an AR afterwards. That's an after-action review. Give them the feedback. Let them know that this didn't work. You just go out and get it done.
I think just one other final thing is that it's clearly a provocation in its ambivalence. And it puts it back on the viewer to be outraged as opposed to traveling with outrage, right? This phrase is so cryptic and just the ambivalence in it makes people get angry on one side or the other, because basically they have to say, but it isn't but it isn't. It's on them to come back at it from every angle, because even right or left or whatever, people basically had to prove a need to basically articulate why it matters, why it isn't just some sort of blasé condition. And I think it's very instructive politically for ways of thinking about how we communicate about social issues, that this really was productive in generating dialogue.
And for me, I think that it was the title was important because it acknowledges the conflict, because one of the biggest elements of this conflict in the United States since 2003 is how hidden it is from the general public who's not involved. And it is what it is, in my opinion, put it straight in front of us and said, here is this thing that we can't get round, that you can't forget about, that you can't trip over. It's right in front of you. You got to talk about it. For me, that's how it was.
Well, I mean, it's really an expression of helplessness. So I think it does sort of bring like the passivity of some people in the United States into focus. It forces people to acknowledge that it is something that we should be talking about.
What a great title, though. Everyone's got their own take on it.
Yeah, and it's also, it's not about an opinion or the way I assume or speculate or whatever. It is what it is without cushions. That's how we have seen it, and we're just going to tell you how it happened, not how we think it went.
We have time for just a couple more questions, and then I hope you will all take the opportunity to join us and continue the dialogue out in the courtyard.
We have one back here.
A little reception. Thank you.
Right here. Go ahead.
Hey. Me? I was just going to say, when the war started out at Swarthmore College, they did Skyping, and they interviewed a lot of Iraqis on the street, which is something that the major media didn't really do. We didn't really have a feeling for how the war was for Iraqis in general. And I'm wondering, I mean, as I see what you're doing here, I wonder if you consider a companion piece from the Iraqi perspective. I'd love to see something like that, doing something similar in Iraq that sort of matches this one.
It's a good question.
Yeah. What
It'd be
about
nice.
what's your thinking on that?
It'd probably take a different form, but
A little bit, yeah.
in the show at the New Museum, for example, there were two maps on the wall, and one of the US, one of Iraq, with all the place names transposed. So Iraqi towns were actually had the names of American towns and vice versa. And that's like a long-term idea to twin towns from Iraq and the US. So that would be a more direct involvement of Iraq to start kind of civic dialogue between towns, not just people. But that's slightly different from what you said. But a kind of a road trip.
With a man on the street,
yeah,
how are they viewing this? Because I think we have a fairly decent feeling for how our compatriots view, if we watch the various media outlets view the war.
The thing about American media as opposed to the UK media is the UK media is often quite likes going onto the streets and talking to people about their views.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas the American TV media on the whole, for something like this conflict, I didn't see very much of that. So you do just get the experts in, as it were. I mean, and all these people. So that's a more kind of maybe more European take on it, is to talk to people on the streets.
But I think what we're really missing is the Iraqi view.
Yeah.
The man on the street.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see.
Esam might object to that.
I was in Iraq, and I was a man on the street.
Right. That's one. But I'm talking about the project itself, based on interviewing the man on the street in Iraq.
Well, again, the economy that started the war is also here a main player. That if you find somebody to fund such a project in Iraq, I think it would be a wonderful thing. So.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't have a funder right now, but.
Well, let us know when you do.
Thank you all. I'm just wondering, it is what it is, but what do you make of all the Iraq veterans that are coming home and they've done what they were told to do and then they kill themselves when they get home? Because they can't live with what they've done. We see that in Vietnam. I covered the Vietnam War, and nobody talks about it, but between 150 and 200,000 veterans have committed suicide since the end of the war. And so, to me, that's a very big question.
Well, as much as I'm sure everyone would love to hear me sit up here and say, no, I think it's a really good idea for them to commit suicide. I mean, sure, it's a terrible thing. I don't know, but this project isn't really about that.
We met a few guys who were quite disturbed on our trip. It's homeless guy and a few others who I would say would be in some sort of danger. I would imagine one especially in Cincinnati. But yeah, of course, that's the but you think about civilian populations and the amount of suicides in Iraq after the invasion. Do you count those as victims of the war as well? I mean, you're right. For a rounded picture, you have to think about that. But yeah, it's going to be a whole wave of this in the next 10 years or so, 20 years. This is going to go on and on.
However, I think, as my opinion is, education is the main issue here. The veteran from Vietnam that I talked about him, I talked with him for 3 hours, and he was a little bit, as I said before, he was a little bit upset that we've been attacked and we need to attack and whatever. So I explained to him how life in Iraq like, and then he had some knowledge about the Iraqi culture. And on those little mere 3 hours, he started to have compassion with them. So if you know about the other culture, you're going to like them more. Now, if you know about war and what happens in war, you're going to be more considerate. Are you the suitable person to go to the war or not? I mean, on TV, I see the army advertisement there with the music, pom, pom, and I go like, wow, that's very impressive. I mean, for an 18-year-old, of course, they would join the war not knowing what happened. We had a veteran that was saying that he was taking on a carrier and they have him shoot missiles on Iraq and kill thousands of people. And he said, I did not sign in the army to go kill people. And I was saying, what did you sign for? Playing golf? You're going to do that in the army. What did you thought?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The issue with suicide in the military, one of the things that happened in, I think it was February, maybe March, the Army had what was called a stand down. And so every soldier in every reserve component and the active duty went through a half-day's training on suicide awareness and prevention. It's something that the Army is aware of. It's something that they are trying to use a topic of conversation. They are trying to address that. Even the guy, the really haunted fellow from Cincinnati, Jeremy and I had talked to him about, there are resources available. And one of the things he made it very clear, he wouldn't go into the reasons why, but he made it very clear that he wasn't really interested in using any of those resources. And he wasn't currently serving, so it wasn't just, the matter of the stigma, that you might lose your security clearance, people might think bad of you, so it's not clear why he was avoiding using the resources available. But it's obviously very complicated. And one of the things that makes it complicated is that the constituency that joined the military, young men 18 to 25 years old, they're the ones most likely to commit suicide in the civilian population as well. Now you're putting these people through a traumatic situation and arming them heavily. You're going to get an increase in suicides.
And forcing them to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do, like kill people.
I think they should scan people before they put them in the army if they have tendency to commit suicide or if they likely to be heavily scarred before they enter the army, not scanning them after they get in the army, which they already been ruined. But the thing is, this is just my opinion. You decide what's better for your country,
to get young people
and please
in the
leave us
army.
do
They're
our
not
country the same.
making clear choices.
Totally. And I also think it's, a lot of these troops are coming home. And I think it really affected the political landscape of America because the family, they come back to no resources.
Yes.
And and the economy's in a nightmare. And there's no jobs. And the family, and it spreads out, particularly across the poor red states in America. And the poor class is the ones that are really affected. And that has big political ramifications across this country.
I'd like to announce also, as I said earlier, we have a program in 2 weeks that's related to this exhibition that is a whole panel dedicated to mental health and medical care of Iraq war veterans. So I hope you can come back for that as well. We have time for one more question, and then I hope you can come join us in the courtyard, please.
Hi, I have a question just about the language that's being used, especially for the hammer manifestation of this project. The panelists or the experts, my question is about actually that term as expert, especially because in terms of how the media presents the idea of expert, how the government presented ideas of expertise, how is that being, gap being bridged?
I think the word participant is a better word.
We're not happy to be called experts.
But you're an expert in your own life.
That's
in
right.
That respect.
I mean, we have to take responsibility for that because the new museum, we argued long and hard about this, to use the term expert or not. And We chose the term expert because these are the individuals who've been participating in this project are experts in their own experience. They're not pundits like you see on the television, and they are being they are guests of the institution, and it gives a very particular color to and a kind of respect to the to what they can contribute to the project. So they're not speakers because they're not making speeches, and they are participants, Jeremy, it's true, but they also, each individual who's participating in this project has something to say that's very specific and something that they know about. It doesn't have to be, nuclear fission or something. It could be being an expert at surviving, being a housewife in Baghdad last year. We had a few people like that. That was our
Some
our
people were
understanding.
actually experts as well.
Yes,
I mean,
in
bona
fact.
fide sort of academics or archaeologists, so they were. But I mean, I think the word expert and experience, probably the derivation of the word is very similar, a similar root. So I'm just trying to defend
It's
it
a very
on
good question, though.
For myself, whenever I was asked about that, you know, I would sort of roll my eyes and do like the sort of the virtual quotation marks, and I would say, yeah, I'm an expert in the sense that I was there and I have firsthand experiences, but you know, I don't have any monolithic truth to present. I've got no monopoly on sort of how you should think about the war or anything like that. I've just got my own experiences.
Yeah, well, the experts just put a little bit of weight on my shoulders because when I talk to somebody, I want to be a little bit non-threatening. If I talk to somebody as, more than I naturally do, but if I talk to somebody as an expert, he would previously would think that I believe whatever I tell him, he has to take it to the bank. Because I'm the expert.
But we didn't call these guys experts on the road. We just called them
never.
participants.
Because I want them to feel that we are having conversation from both sides and we are the same.
One of the more interesting things that we were called on the road trip was there was someone in New Orleans who said to me, "You're a survivor," and I said to this guy, "What are you talking about? You're a survivor. 2008 was a great year to be in Iraq. I mean, you lived through the hurricanes, so it's." Different people have different perceptions about other people's experiences.
Absolutely.
Thank you all, and I hope that the conversation continues.